Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Erica Plouffe Lazure.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
I am doing great. I am so excited to talk to you. Can you tell me a little bit about your book?
So Proof of Me is a linked short story collection that is set in Eastern North Carolina, and it's got 5 different sections to it that each kind of deal with a certain type of theme or a family or some sort of neighborhood that kind of correlates with each other. And so the idea of why they're interconnected is because they all take place or connect to a fictional community in Eastern North Carolina. And so, and I had I'm not a Southerner, but I did spend about 5 years living in Eastern North Carolina. I was a newspaper reporter there, and I ended up working at the local university and had a chance to pursue fiction from there. And so I feel like a lot of I'm not a Southern writer, but my literary heritage is definitely set and based in the South. And so there's a lot of Southern themes and Southern color, if you will, in terms of the way people talk and the setting and stuff. And so, yeah, that's kind of the scope of the book. Yeah.
That is so cool. I was actually going to ask how North Carolina came to be a part of it. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm grew up in New England and Massachusetts, and I live in New Hampshire now. And at some point, I moved down to North Carolina and had a chance to be a newspaper reporter there and work and live in that community. And I still have some ties there. My partner lives there, but I live and work up here now. So, yeah.
Cool. Did you find that your background, because you mentioned it was in journalism, right? Did you find that influenced this book, aside from the obvious of having that happen in North Carolina?
Yeah, I think a lot of my natural creative writing process comes from almost a journalistic inquiry, not in the hard news sense, but in the eavesdropping on someone in the grocery line sense, where you're like, oh, that sounds really interesting. Let me know. Let me figure out more, let me hear more about that story, or let me follow up on a lead, and, or walking into a new space and being able to read a room and kind of be like, oh, who would be willing to talk to me? Who's got a story to tell? And having a little bit of sense of the way people's body language, how they carry themselves, what they're wearing, can sometimes give you a hint into their lives and whether they'd be willing to talk to you or open to a conversation. And so I think a lot of the way I approach my stories, like the voices that become inhabited, or a little bit of me endeavoring to channel someone that I may have met, or some version of a person that I may have met. And so I would say the way, the journalism comes in, like attention to detail, hearing how people say and being true to what they actually say, and hearing the bend in the language and the different ways that, they express themselves, what they're expressing, like outwardly, but also what they're not saying, and listening for that and capturing what's going on under the surface. And so I think a lot of that went directly into the way I approach fiction writing, because someone has a story to tell, but they're not always telling you the whole story. And as a reader, you can kind of get a feel for what's going on under the surface, what they don't want to share, and what they're inadvertently sharing. So,
oh, that is so cool. Yeah, I was going to say, because in books, it's perfect because you do get that. You get the everything happening under the surface in some cases. I do want to talk about, in this book, you play around with form a little bit, where it's like there's one chapter that I just was reading the other day, and it was where it's like a character leaving a message for someone, and then there's ones that are more like traditional third person, and then there's ones it plays around a bit. How did you decide what form would fit with what story, or did that sort of come naturally?
Yeah, the voicemail story, Azimuth and Altitude, is the name of that story. And for me, I was trying to find a way for the sister who's leaving all the messages to say what she really felt. And with a story, usually there's like an occasion for the story, a reason for the story. And so I don't know that Cheryl, the protagonist, would have had a space or a venue to say what she wanted to say without the ability to speak uninterrupted on this voicemail machine, right? And so being able to explain to her sister what was going on and why she needed her to come back to the hospital, and why she ended up in the hospital in the first place. I feel like it's part confessional and part giving that particular character the space in which to speak her truth, because she's a character that doesn't always get a chance to do that. And people don't often listen to her. And so having, like the record be in, on the, on the machine, on the voicemail is, a way for her to, I think, establish herself and tell her story. So, and then, and some of them, the ones that are like those first person, they feel very kind of confessional to me. Like someone has a story that they're just like needing to get off their chest. Like the first story, Cadence, was told to me when I was a newspaper reporter, some version of that, where someone had been welding an oil tank and it exploded, and it didn't kill him, but in my story, he dies. But in the real life story, I mean, I listened to this man speak about his experience with the explosion and what happened. And, and I was a brand new reporter at the time and listening to this story, and, 5, 6, 7 years later, I'm like, oh, I might try to write fiction. And like that story still stayed with me. It felt so like present, and his voice came back to me, and I just started writing it. So there's certain, like, I don't know if it's a wave of information or a little hook that hooks me into a story or to a storyteller. And then I just start writing, and I'm able to get into that space. So
yeah, that story especially, and not only because it's the first one, really stuck out to me because the imagery is just so poignant in it. And that happens a lot throughout the book, I found, where there are certain like you get partway through a story and then there'll just be like 1 or 2 images that it just would hit me, and I'd go, oh my goodness, this is like it says everything. Right. Did you find yourself like starting with those moments, or did they sort of pop up as you were writing?
Yeah, I think images tend to pop up. Usually you've got, for me anyway, my creative processes, there's a voice or a circumstance or an event, something that's happening. And then eventually the objects show up in a way that you go, oh, look, there's a sewing machine in this story. And then 3 stories later, it's like, here's another sewing machine. And like, oh, wait, and you start to kind of see the patterns of object and the language of objects that I think every object that we encounter has its own history, its own story. I love going to thrift shops and being like, oh my gosh, this like 80-year-old, lamp or something, or little pocketbook. Like what's the story of this? And so, I hope to, and each little section and each story has a little object, like a drawing of an object that I had created. And so that language of objects, I hope, comes through and tells its own version of the story, It definitely
did to me, for sure.
That's good to hear. Yeah. Thanks.
What would you say is like your favorite part of the writing for you, the writing process?
I really love revision. That sounds silly, but wow, there's something about having an idea and then being able to, for me, part of my creative process is to read the stories out loud, and to read sections out loud, and then to go back to it and say, okay, that didn't sound right. Let's work with just this sentence. Robert Morgan, the author, had taught us a seminar at one of the grad programs I was at, and we were asking about revision. He said, just stay with the sentence until it's where you want it to be. I think people tend to be like, oh, I'm going to get to this later, or oh, it's good enough. And I think there's something, once you've got the arc of the story and once you know where it's going, if you're able to start to kind of wordsmith and fine tune once you know where you're going, then I think that to me can be the most satisfying aspect of writing, because you're really shining up your sentences and getting them to say exactly and conveying exactly what you want them to say. But I don't recommend that for a first draft. I recommend it for the last thing you do. Cause some people I teach, and I have students who work on these beautiful little paragraphs, and but the rest of the story doesn't really work. And so, so get your big story down, like painting a canvas, right? You get the broad brush down, and then you go in and you start to fine tune, and it's okay, I'm going to start painting the hand now because I know where it is relative to the rest of the portrait. So that's kind of how I see it. So that, I would say that would be my favorite part about writing.
That is so cool. I don't get too many people on here that love the revision process usually when I ask questions similar to that. But I've had a few like you on there, and every time it's so interesting to hear that from me, because I'm someone that does not really enjoy revision.
Yeah.
But I can absolutely understand why you do, because it really is fine tuning that and putting in all of those added things.
Mm-hmm. And even with the collection itself, right? I'd circulated the collection for a while, and it'd always kind of be a finalist or, runner up and, some of the smaller press contests. And I was like, something's going on. I need to go back in and see what's happening with this. And so I printed out every story, and I started to think of them in terms of groupings and how do I organize this? So that I was like, oh, well, I've got a story about Cassidy Penelope and story 3 and story 8. Let's put all of her stories together and let's make a little mini, not even a novella. It's just a little arc of a person's life. Let's put that together. And here's the Weaver family. They're all over the place. So let's try to condense their stories into one. And then from there, once you've got the structure of those two anchoring chapters or sections, then I was able to kind of fan out and see what are some of the other ways to connect what's going on in the first section to what's going on in the last section. And you'll see characters in very early versions were not the same characters that would show up in a different story, but I was able to fine tune it. Once I knew what I was doing, I was like, oh, Florine in Spawning Season is definitely the wife in I can't remember the name of the story, but a story toward the end of the collection. And so I was able to kind of find and make those connections. And it was only through revision that I was able to get that cohering feeling that I think the collection now has, and I don't think it had that before.
Yeah, it was really interesting as I was reading it to pick up on that, because I knew going in, of course, that it was all interconnected. But as I was reading, I kept feeling like I was having aha moments as a reader, going, oh, wait, this one is here, and this one's popping up here. And something that I loved about the way that you did that was having it be from other characters' perspectives, still in the same arcs. It felt like you were really getting the full spectrum of a person, right? Even from someone that they barely have had any contact with. You're hearing about them over here, and then the next section you're hearing about, or I was just reading the part where it was talking about Sissy a lot, and I thought that was so cool how you did it, where it's someone at the parade talking about this character's life. I'm trying not to give any spoilers. And then the next chapter goes straight into talking about her brother, right. Saying what actually happened. And that was really cool.
And yeah, and that's, and thanks for picking up on that, but I think what what that feels like to me is a little bit like living in a community, right? Like where you hear something about somebody, or, you know, someone has a certain way of coming to terms with something they've done, or, you know, there was a big scandal and everyone's talking about it. And so you hear bits and pieces of stories, but you never hear like the whole story, right? Like Sissy never has her chance to speak, right? Which I kind of wish she did a little bit, but I'm kind of glad to just kind of
in short story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's for another time. But yeah, I feel like the benefit of writing about a specific place is and an era is that you get that benefit of, you know, oh, this one's so-and-so's boss, and you know, and this one is the guy who ended up, you know, moving to Nashville, and like, oh wow, and this is the guy who ended up dying, you know. And so there's all these like little connections that I think a reader can make and feel hopefully rewarded by just kind of staying with the collection and paying attention to it and having fun with it, because that was my hope, to, you know, bring these voices and people to life.
Yeah, for sure. That was it was really, really interesting throughout it. So did you have a favorite perspective to write from, or a favorite character to write about?
I think I would say I really liked writing Quinn's character, the guitarist in Nashville. That whole story was like literally written in Nashville. I was on a road trip on my way to a workshop, and I needed to write a story for the workshop. And so I was sitting in Nashville, this Robert's Western World, and this amazing guitarist was on stage, and I was like, I wonder what his story is. And somewhere between like the setting and the I don't know, I loved being able to step a little bit into his consciousness and think about like what I'd learned about the city and what I enjoyed about it. And some of it's kind of underside too. You know, there's a lot of homeless people, a lot of people who suffer from substance abuse and don't really have a place to stay. And I think that's you know, we see that that Quinn is on the cusp of that, even though he doesn't really understand that about himself just yet. So that was fun to write. I really liked bringing that space to life in a way that I just was like, okay, time to write a story. I have to get this down, and it kind of worked. And I loved Shirley's perspectives because she, I think I said earlier, you know, she doesn't have a chance to really speak or have a whole lot of agency in her real life. And so like these spaces where she's able to kind of express herself to her sister or, you know, as the narrator, I enjoyed exploring what kind of intelligence she could bring into her storytelling, because I think, you know, she's, you know, we understand that she's a bit limited in her mental capacity, but yet she's still really intelligent. She's such an observer of her world, and in some way everything she does is a kind of coping mechanism. And so I really loved like kind of like thinking about how to celebrate Shirley's character.
I loved that too. It was really interesting to like get a peek into her mind and see like everything that was happening. And as I was reading, I think it was the voicemail story, I think was the one. As I was reading it, the further and further I was getting into it, the more I was internally going, oh no, I just want like protect her. What did these people do? Like, right. And it was a really fascinating read.
Thank you. Yeah. That was a interesting story the voicemail story. There's so much desperation in that. And her sister Juniper just, you know, she tries, but she's just fails her family time and again. And you kind of understand, you know, if after reading like where she's coming from a little bit, but she's a bit, unsympathetic. I think one of the main themes in this book is that many of the characters don't really learn their lessons. You know, like they keep trying to be better people and they keep failing at almost every turn. There's some who have a little bit of moments of justice and redemption, but for the most part, I think they still feel the stuckness of themselves on the page. And I think as readers, we can see that, but they can't see that as characters.
It makes for a really dynamic reading experience, for sure. Now, in this collection, you balance some things that are sort of, I'm trying to find the right word. I want to say my gut reaction is to stay sort of fantastical, but like, and once again, try not to spoil, but like there's the one with scabs, or the one about lice and things that you wouldn't typically expect people to do. But at the same time, the book feels very grounded. How did you balance that while you wrote?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how, but yeah, with the lights, I think that to me seemed logical within the world that had been created. And I think with any story, you've got to kind of allow for the story's own inner logic to take shape. And so sometimes, you know, the natural progression is, you know, you end up putting up a bunch of lights, right? Or you end up, you know, doing things you might not normally expect a person to do, like go through the car wash with the windows open, or, you know, and, you know, you want to keep a reader guessing, but you also want to make sure that whatever ends up happening feels logical within the realm of the story and the parameters that you've already set in that story. And so, I don't know, that's kind of how I think I manage a balance. You know, I do love writing a little bit in a kind of fabulous edge, but I think these are more, they feel a little bit more grounded in, you know, what may have actually happened versus, you know, these unexplained phenomena. So,
yeah. I totally get what you mean by saying like it's the internal logic. Cause I kept finding with certain things where I would be like, oh yes, of course the character is doing this because that's the next step in this story. Right. And then all of a sudden I would realize that it was something that I was like, oh wait, well I would never do that, but I'm not the character and I'm not living in this, this world with these different set of rules. Which was, it was honestly very fun to read about, to kind of get thrown into this new logic.
Yeah, great. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
So when did you first want to be an author?
So there are two times. One, when I was like in 4th grade and I wrote a little book and I thought it was very cute. It was about a family of bugs. And then, and I loved all things creative. I love to draw. I love to dance. But there's a real practical side of my personality. I kind of grew up in a working class family. I was like, well, you know, if you want to write, you can't, you know, write a novel. Like, who does that? Like, I became a journalist, right? And so, you know, pursuing that kind of line of, you know, paycheck plus creativity. And I think it really served me well for a while because I was able, like, some of my first jobs as a newspaper reporter was a little bit like, you know, getting a master's degree in like reality, you know, and like, oh, this is how tax levies work. And this is what a berm is, like all these things that you just don't know, but like voters get really mad about and like are concerned, you know? And so kind of understanding the way, you know, small towns work. And then after I'd moved to North Carolina, I'd shifted jobs into working kind of from a reporter to like a university like job in the news bureau, and was able to take grad level, you know, like creative writing classes. And I was just kind of like, oh, let's try this out. Maybe this is possible. Maybe this is something that's available to me. And because I'd tried to pursue a master's in history, and it just didn't strike me as something fun. It didn't feel rewarding in the way that I was like, let's just try writing stories and see what happens. And I'm really glad I took that that leap to see what would happen if I started to write fiction, because there were too many stories that I'd heard as a reporter or growing up that I just they wouldn't leave me alone, and I'm like, all right, let's get these down and let's see what happens. And so I think that really that natural desire to tell a story, and I think everyone has that desire, whether they write it down or, talk it over with, friends at a restaurant or, at a bar or whatever. I felt that urge. And so, was able to pursue that and, in North Carolina, and then, at East Carolina University, and then later at Bennington, and, and then kind of all these wonderful teachers being able to help me to kind of find my voice and draw me out more into that space where stories can be explored and kind of help, I don't know, solve little problems or things that you're thinking about, or issues that you kind of notice and want to kind of account for in some way through fiction. So.
That is so awesome. Yeah. And I think it's pretty universal for a lot of writers to have that, where it's of course not all, but a lot, where it's that a story is just kind of getting you and or a few at once. Or I've had times before where I've had one scene and I can't get it out of my head, and it's stuck there for about a month until I write it in the way it was supposed to be.
Yes.
And it's really interesting when that happens.
Yeah, and it's funny because right now I've been relying a bit on voice to text, and which is really interesting because you can, you get an idea and you can just speak it into your phone, and it captures about 80% of what you said, but it's still there. Whereas having I'm having my writer's time, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to carve out space for this to happen, right? It makes the process a bit more spontaneous feeling, or I'm able to just say, oh, I have this idea. I need to write it down, via speaking it right now. And it's just available to me in a way that sitting down and writing it might not be available, just because I'm so strapped for time with teaching and everything else I've got to do. So
that's really cool. I always use voice notes, but I didn't even think of a voice to text. That would be great. Are there any other tools like that you've used or are currently using?
I don't think so. I mean, the voice to text to me has been revolutionary. It's just in terms of drafting speeches or saying something that like drafting letters or emails to people, but also the fictional component really helps. Photographs, I mean, I always, there's a space to just where you say, okay, wow, that was really fascinating. I need to take a picture of whatever it was to remember it, and to remember what moved me about it. And maybe some aspect of that's going to make it into a short story, but I'm never sure. Or if I'm at a museum or, on a tour, a history tour or something, taking a picture and getting the names of things. I was at a bowling alley the other night, and I was like, okay, there's a story here. I'm not sure what it is, but I took a picture of the league information with all the names of the teams, because they were so weird and arcane and just have a certain
Do you share one?
I was in 1988, and it's this is neat. There's a story here, and I'm not sure what, but I figured while I was at the bowling alley, let's take some pictures so that I get the feel of it, so I can go back to it and try to reconstruct what I know or see from there.
Oh, that is awesome. Do you ever have anything like that where it's, or this is kind of leading into another question I was actually about to ask, but are there any books or movies or even songs or things that influenced the stories in this book, or any of your stories in the way that picture did?
Yeah. I would say certainly William Faulkner was, influential in that, he wrote about a particular geographic landscape of the fictional Yoknapatawpha County, which he just kind of inserted in the middle of Mississippi somewhere. And it's all in his imagination. But, and so I think, in crafting, Newborn, there was a bit of, inspiration, Faulkner did it. He made up his own town. I'm going to make my own town up. So for sure, I think he's been, a bit influential in terms of just the thematic idea of writing about place. But also those super long, there's a few super long list sentences that I just can't help myself and writing and so there's a few in there, and I have to kind of give him a little nod and say, he's got, I think, in one of his novels, there's a sentence that's a page and a half long, and it's I'm not that obnoxious, but
I would imagine that would get a little tricky to read.
Yeah, no, I don't think I can get away with it. And another author who I've always admired is Mark Richard. He's a Louisiana writer, but he lives in California now. But he's got this way of conveying first person voice, stepping into a kind of consciousness that I aspire to, and I really admire his the way he does that. Miranda July, oh my gosh, she's anything she does is just kind of brilliant. I can't remember the name of her film that she just produced, but I had a chance to kind of it was just she's consistently quirky in her character development and that kind of oddity. I think that you were, slightly fantastic, but still within the realm of realistic. I think she does that wonderfully. And, I've definitely been influenced by her.
So almost like an Ann Tyler type thing.
Yeah. And of course, Jill McCorkle, who is a North Carolina writer and who's just been, just writing stories about this one area for most of her life and making it her life's work and doing a beautiful job of it. She's so well researched, and she captures these voices of people and their vulnerabilities in a way that really I just admire so much. So I'd say those are some of the influences. It's funny. People kept saying you need to read all of Kittredge, and I hadn't, and because it's another kind of geographically linked short story collection, and I read it after I sent the final manuscript to the publisher, and I was like, oh yeah, I could totally see this, why people were suggesting that I read it, and it certainly, I think there's some. You can kind of see why people would say, oh yeah, that would be a good story, set of stories for me to check out. So
that is so cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. You were a great guest. It was really awesome to talk with you.
Thanks, Molly. This has been super fun. I really appreciate your care and interest in and perceptive questions and observations about my collection. I'm really excited to share it with the world. So thank you.
Thank you. I really love this book. Anyone listening to this, please go check out Proof of Me. It is absolutely incredible. Also, before we do the outro, I want to give I have one more question, but first I want to give one quick plug and say congratulations on your New York Times review. That's amazing. I heard about that. That's so exciting.
Thank you. That was beyond, that was a huge surprise for me. And someone asked me, well, what does it feel like? I was like, it feels like a panic attack, except all the feelings are good feelings, right? A kind of elation and not really being able to control the feeling of elation. So for what that's worth, yeah.
That's so incredible. But yeah, congratulations on that. People listening to this, go read that. Read the book. So many reading assignments this episode.
Homework. Yeah.
My last question for you is, what do you have coming up?
Oh gosh. Let's see. So I've got, I'm so excited. I'm going to be able to go to Spain in June. I'm going to have a writing residency. And while I'm there, I hope to add some more stories to my what I hope to be my next collection called Desire Path. And Desire Path is actually like an architectural term that describes like the footpath people take like as a shortcut to getting to a place. Like there's a sidewalk that might take you around and feels like the logical way of traveling. And then there's the footpath that everyone has like carved out over time because it's just an easier, more direct route. And so I loved that idea as a kind of a concept of like desire and like people like endeavoring to take the most direct path to whatever they wanted. And I also love it in terms of the idea of like transit and stories of travel and moving. And so I'm kind of working with those themes and thinking about that. So we'll see how it turns out. So
that's so exciting. Well, I know I, for one, will be reading it. That sounds really cool. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
And I'm Erica Plouffe Lazure.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.